Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Lance Lovejoy.
Great. Thank you. All right, thank you. All right, try it again. Who's running paid media campaigns today? Yeah, most of the audience. Excellent, in the right place. Good. I run a digital advertising agency called Closed Loop, and we're fortunate to work with lots of high-growth B2B clients, many of whom are at this conference, actually. And we've driven high rates of growth for them over time. And we've done that by combining really experienced people with a high-touch staffing model with our own proprietary technology, and that's allowed us to put up some pretty good average growth rates for clients over time. And I tell you that not to toot our own horn, but to demonstrate why I think we've got somewhat of a unique perspective on how we can leverage AI with these campaigns. It really has been a journey for us in terms of our adoption of machine learning and applying it to digital advertising. And we had to be pulled kicking and screaming into it a little bit because we got accustomed over time to really having a high degree of control over these campaigns. And to leverage machine learning, part of the discomfort is that you've got to give up some degree of control to the machine to let it do its best work. And so I think I'm going to share with you some of our learnings in this journey, and maybe it'll resonate with you. Why are we talking about this? Well, because it works. And that was the first step of our journey, was testing these different forms of machine learning that could be applied to these ad campaigns and realizing that they were finally starting to work. Machine learning finally learned, and it tipped at some point, and started actually delivering to the promise that it's had for a while. Google dropped this line at their GML event earlier this year, where they said they have 3,000 researchers and engineers dedicated to AI. And they said a majority of the code being produced by Google is not produced by a human anymore. So they've got developers who are teaching the machines to produce the final code. It's getting weird. And Google has kind of thrown down the gauntlet. And years ago they said they were going to be a mobile-first company. They're now saying they're going to be an AI-first company. So this is happening fast. And for us as advertisers, I think we've got to face reality here in that the number of levers at our control when running these campaigns has only increased over time, and the variations that we've got to deal with, the number of variables, has exploded to the point where we can't use our limited human minds to control that anymore. Google has again, dropped this crazy soundbite. They said they can analyze 70 million signals in under 100 milliseconds. And even if that's off by a factor of 100 or 1,000, it's still ludicrous how fast their algorithms are able to process things in these real-time auctions to power their ads. Contrast that to humans, and we have a hard time assessing one variable at a time sometimes, right? But a machine learning algorithm couldn't have crafted this cartoon, right? There are certain things clearly that humans are better at, hopefully will always be better at. And that leads me to one of my new obsessions, InspiroBot. InspiroBot is this fun online tool that will generate inspirational or sometimes not so inspirational quotes leveraging AI. So a couple examples for it. I like this one. It generates the imagery as well. So you get these great motivational posters with these nonsensical quotes. And I'm a cyclist, and so this actually really appealed to me. So I thought this was a good example to share. And I like that. Soon existence will just get harder. Stay fit. Yeah. Very optimistic. Another fun machine learning example was when they fed a machine learning algorithm the whole Sherwin-Williams paint database. And I don't know if you've seen this one, but and they asked the machine learning algorithm to come up with paint colors and name them. And we got great results like Snowbonk, Stargoon, Dorkwood. I love Dorkwood. It's just perfect. And one of my favorites, clearly, I've decided every color in my house is dope now, by the way. It's dope. It's awesome. And the last one, Turdley, is a solid winner. And had some fun working with the designer on this one. It's Turdley by Sherwin-Williams. There you go. So the algorithm has a way to go. I mean, the reality, we watch these movies and we think, all right, yeah, at some point the machines are going to take over and overthrow humanity. That's the Instagram future. The real future in the present right now is really more about leveraging the machines for advanced forms of multivariate pattern recognition. A lot less sexy, sorry. But very powerful if we can figure out how to leverage it. And so I think about how to use this in the advertising space and think about, how do we identify the key targets amidst, all the noise and the potential people we could target with these ads out there. And if you'll let me use the space metaphor here, if the stars here are who we're trying to really target, I would argue that historically, when we've had granular control over the campaigns, the best we've been able to do is something like this. We can put these kind of boxes together and go, all right, that's a campaign, and we're going to try to cluster these together so we get as best coverage as we can. And that's kind of how we've managed campaigns over time. And we've left some money on the table. We've had some lost opportunity. Our ideal future, obviously, is to just target exactly those people that we want, and that's kind of the promise of ABM and some of these other forms of advertising. But I think it's a long ways off. I think it's a really long way off, and I don't know that that's necessarily what we want. I label that future that we kind of dream about a little bit, push-button marketing. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more coming up. I think there's an intermediate phase, though. And if the blocky, past is where we've been, and if push-button marketing and just, everything's finitely targeted is where we're going, I think we're in this weird in-between phase right now, where we're getting a little better targeted, but it's still not perfect. And I think we've got to acknowledge that the addressable audience, the addressable market, often is a lot bigger than we think. And I think we miss the forest for the trees, we miss the universe for the galaxies, sometimes, if I can stretch that metaphor. And by over-focusing on maybe, picking up what we've missed, we're missing the bigger picture sometimes, and that we've got a lot bigger opportunity with these campaigns. And if we apply that thinking on a channel-by-channel basis, well, now you're playing four-dimensional chess and trying to target things on this basis. And it can be somewhat daunting and complicated. But I want to give you a different way to think about it, because it can be easy to get lost in the weeds on this. And so the right way to think about it, I think, is not that, all right, there was before we had, computing and data, and after, right? And the media, I think, pushes us to view things in a very simplistic way, right? It's black or white and so on. I think it's more like this. It's more that of a continuum. And if our past was, high degree of control, what I'm calling control freak, and if our future maybe is this push button concept, we're early on in this. We're about here now, right? And I don't know that it's going to be a straight line to get to our eventual AI-driven future. And I think that the name of the game in this intermediate period is riding the beast. How do we leverage this? And I'll show you some examples of what this looks like in the real world coming up. I also want to float the possibility that maybe push-button marketing, where everything's finally targeted and all we do is tell the platforms what we're selling and how much we're willing to pay and let them do all the work for us, I don't know that that's necessarily where we want to go. So I'm gonna leave that as an open question. I do think, though, that our progression is going to look a lot more like self-driving cars. And if you're familiar with the self-driving car space, it's the Society of Automotive Engineers has put together these different levels of automation. And right now we're at level 1, level 2 for the most part. And ultimately we want to get to the point where we call the car, it comes picks us up, and we chill out in the back seat and it drops us at our destination. That's level 5, right? I think this same kind of continuum applies in the ad space, and bless you. And I think that we're seeing different channels leverage different levels of automation right now. I would argue that app advertising is pretty highly automated. That's probably a level 4, right? A lot of your historical search campaigns are, maybe partial. Maybe those are level 2. And I think that, maybe some display campaigns are somewhere in between, maybe between level 3 and level 4. And that's our reality, and I think it's a healthier way to look at this. So I want to acknowledge, too, though, that, we've got so many data flows that we're dependent on to manage and optimize these campaigns. We've got to acknowledge the things that can go wrong as we try to automate all of this stuff, right? I mean, has anyone ever had an experience where, their tracking broke? Come on, yeah, all right, there we go. Happens all the time, right? Oh, they updated the landing page and the tracking code slipped off. Oops. All right. How about a new product launch, a new initiative where you don't have historical data to feed the machine to learn on? That's a complicating factor. What if you change your objective? Oh, crap, how does the algorithm respond to that? There are all kinds of variables that happen in the real world that the machines are, today at least, not equipped to deal with, right? And I had this example last week. I logged into our Google Ads account, and I got this alert. Even the platforms themselves kind of mess up the data sometimes. And, that whole thing where all the conversion data was bad for over a week, we got that fixed. Don't worry about it, My immediate response was, what decision, was the algorithm making decisions on that data? Because you're telling me it was bad now. So was my budget poorly spent? I don't know. So there's a lot that can go wrong. But let me give you some practical tips for how you can leverage this. And I've got, number one is use an AI-friendly structure. It's really changed how we think about structuring campaigns. And let's see what InspireBot thinks about that. Nice. Ambition is pathetic. Thank you. Very cheery. All right. So we think different about structure now with machine learning than we used to before, when it was about empowering ourselves to have granular control. And the balance we need to strike is that, we want to provide enough signal to the algorithm to be able to optimize on the one hand, which argues for having less granular control, but we still want to have enough granularity that we can derive some signal ourselves about what's working and what's not. And there's some tension there. And we want to find a balance point. Facebook themselves, over the course of 2 years, has changed their recommendation for how we should structure campaigns from very granular in 2017 to not granular at all. They're telling you basically put everything into as few ad sets as possible, within your campaigns. It's a radical departure, and this is, again, from Facebook themselves. And the rationale there is to minimize the learning phase so that you can have the algorithm optimizing for you as quickly as possible. Interestingly, it tends to work more often than not. And this is an example of where we had to be drug along into this, but we had to let the data and the experiments prove out to let us get to the point where we got more comfortable really broadening our audience sizes and working with smaller ad sets. So that's the Facebook side of things. We like to put together our own visualizations where we put these tree map diagrams together. And in this example, size of each box is representative of spend on a campaign or an ad group, and color is ROI, where red is bad, blue is good. So we get a sense when we develop these visualizations for the degree of granularity of an account structure and the ROI distribution. And it can be really beneficial, it can be really helpful when we look at things this way. When we think about structure, if we see a structure like this, we would argue that's not friendly to machine learning. It's too granular in that a majority of the ad groups or ad sets didn't get a click even in the last 3 months, but were actively running, right? There's not enough signal for the algorithm to be able to optimize against, right? This is a before and after example, we restructured it, we reduced the granularity actually, and where it gets interesting was when you stack these up side by side, or one on top of the other, and you see the before and after, and if you outline the roughly 70% of spend volume, we went from what was 200-300 ad sets down to about 23. We reduced the degree of granularity by about 90%. And what happened is now the algorithm had enough signal to optimize against such that it moved the losing ad groups out of that top 70%. It let more budget fall to the winners in the higher volume campaigns where there was room to run. And so it's really changed how we think about structuring accounts. This is how we're able to leverage what the machine's good at, right? If you want to develop those visualizations for yourself, we do have a tool we've developed that lets you do that. You can authenticate your Google account at checkup.closedloop.com, and we'll auto-generate some of those tree maps and other visualizations that I'm showing here. So wanted to make sure that you know that tool's available to you. Number 2, it's changed how we think about the metrics we optimize to. InspireBot, what do you say about Plan for Death? Nice. All right. Very cheerful. Wow, we're on a dark kick today with InspireBot. Okay. So one of the challenges as well, and we're always trying to find the right balance when thinking about applying machine learning, is how far down the funnel can we really optimize and ask the algorithm to optimize against. Ideally, we're getting as far down there as we can, but at some point you run into, especially on the B2B campaigns, you run into a thin data problem where there's just not enough volume of SQLs or transactions to allow the algorithms to optimize against. So you've got to find your sweet spot depending on the data volume that you get in these different things. And I do think you ideally want to think about measuring and optimizing to multiple actions and not just one. And to do that, obviously, you've got to have things instrumented so you're tracking these things. Ideally, you can assign the value to these different actions over time. And ideally, you can figure out what the right sequence is for these different calls to actions as well to align with the buyer's journey. And once you start doing that, then things start getting really interesting. Another facet is just the mechanics of how you get that deeper level conversion data correlated back to your campaign data. And one way to do it, and gets super geeky, is you pass through the GCL ID from Google, for example, to your CRM. You record it in the customer database associated with that lead, such that you can then feed it back out to Google, and at that point you can correlate and view things along a lot of different dimensions to see which creative types, which campaigns, which geographies, which audience types, and so on are actually producing these deeper funnel results for you. It can be really powerful, but again, you've got to have the sufficient volume of data to be able to do it. Super geeky, but this is how you instrument your funnel to be able to get these deeper funnel metrics going. And all of this is part of a longer-term evolution of being able to optimize to the deeper funnel metrics, and the machine learning is being used already to enable much of this, and we're seeing good progress with it, and it changes how we're thinking about how we allocate budget on the front end. And an example of that, for a client of ours, where we had been optimizing to cost per lead and lead volume initially, and the colored bars on the stacked bar chart there are representative of keyword themes. It's how much we were spending on each keyword theme when we were optimizing on a lead basis. We switched over and just went a couple steps deeper in the funnel. We started optimizing to SQLs because we were able to instrument the funnel and put it together. And it changed our spend mix on a keyword theme basis. What we realized is at the top, those orange and those orange bars, those were leads we thought were just too expensive. They're just too pricey. They're head terms. Yes, they're in our space, but we can't afford them. They're $100 a lead, and our tolerance is only $50. So we can't buy them. But once we stitched together the data streams and were able to look back and see how they converted on the back end, we realized, holy crap, those are totally worth it. We need to max those out. And that's what we did. And likewise, the light blue leads, different keyword theme, those were the cheap leads, and we were buying them all day long, and we were happy initially because we were hitting our $50 cost per lead goal. Well, we realized they were junk for the most part. They really didn't perform well on the back end, and we'd been overpaying by about 40% all along. So we reduced our weighting on those, and it changed how we allocated spend pretty dramatically. over time. And that's the power of being able to get to those deeper funnel metrics. And we leveraged AI to help get there. Damn it. Now, what's interesting too is if you change your goals, which happens a lot in a lot of organizations. We had a client come to us and they said, we want to move from an engagement metric to a sign-up metric now. In some cases, and this was one of the ad platforms, all we had to do was flip the switch and said, instead of optimizing to that metric, optimize to this one. And you can see it worked almost overnight. Bang, right? Cool. When it works. Another ad platform, wildly different experience. And this is, this is what riding the beast looks like, right? Well, we're in learning phase. The machine all of a sudden decides it's starved and it can't work at all. And we're like, what the heck? How do we figure this out? And so we had to pull some different levers until we could calibrate things and provide the right inputs in the right way for the algorithm to go, oh, okay, got it. And finally it snapped to, and you see the volume starts to spike on the right side as the cost per lead starts to come down. It started to figure it out. But it took some work for us to get it calibrated properly. That was the hard part. So it's really a process of feeling your way to the right outcome to leverage these machine learning algorithms, which sounds funny to say, right? You're feeling your way to the right outcome in this, leveraging an algorithm. But that's our reality right now. That's how you get there. Number 3, let AI determine the creative fit. Thanks. I love this one. I'm not sure we should be letting the AI determine creative fit, to be honest with you, but there is some power in it. I'll show you some examples. So I think most people are probably familiar with responsive search ads. Is everyone running responsive ads? Yeah, most people are. All right. If you're not, you should. As uncomfortable as it might be, and it's because it works, as I'll demonstrate in a case study coming up. But for those not familiar with it, instead of crafting unique individual ads with these dynamic responsive ads, you craft individual ad assets, and then you let the algorithm determine the right combination of components to serve to that user at that time, at that geography, on that device, at that stage of their buyer journey, and you end up with thousands, potentially millions of different ad variations being served out there that are totally dynamic. And as an example of it, you've got to start writing ads now and thinking about mapping to where people are at in different phases of the buyer journey. And so same keyword, same advertiser, same campaign, different ad, because that particular buyer was at a different stage of the buyer journey. Totally changes how you think about this. And the downside is that you lose some control. The upshot is that you can really improve your quality scores, and we're finding you can actually access additional inventory that isn't available to people who aren't populating their responsive search ads. So it ends up being a bigger deal. I've got some tips for those that want to get more into that here as well. But the results now look like this. So I don't get performance by ad anymore. There isn't a winning ad anymore. I get a sense for the volume of some of my top served ad variants, but I don't know for sure exactly what the cost per lead or our overall ROI is by these anymore. Totally different ballgame. We're riding the beast with this. Did it work? Hell yeah, it worked. I mean, overall, we got a 60% lower CPA with responsive search ads as compared to the traditional expanded text ads. Absolutely worked. General guidelines for leveraging AI, listed some out here, most of which we've talked about. A couple bonus tips on the audiences. Generally, we've got to increase audience size, loosen up the targeting a little bit so that the algorithm has room to run and learn. And then we try to minimize audience overlap by applying audience exclusions to that. So it's becoming an art in terms of figuring out how to leverage the AI to its best use and get the best results for it. Do we want push-button marketing? Anyone remember Space Odyssey? Anyone? Yeah, a few people. All right, excellent. All right. I'm not sure it's a good idea. has backfire potential, right? In general, there are things machines are good at, clearly. We've talked about it. There are things machines can't do, and let's not kid ourselves that they're going to be able to do this anytime soon, right? It's all right. And what it means for us as advertisers is we hopefully can spend less time doing mundane, more process-oriented stuff, and we can think more about strategy and creative and targeting and customer life cycle and so on. I think ultimately that's going to be a good thing. So it's not going to take our jobs. It's not going to replace marketers. But people who don't know how to leverage this are definitely going to be in trouble. Again, reminder, you can use the checkup tool to generate some of these visualizations that we've talked about. I am peddling a book. There you go. If you take the checkup, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the book, calling it Average is Losing. Last word from Inspirabot. There you go. It just creeps me out that an AI came up with this and thinks it's funny. Human sacrifice is always worth it. That's it. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to speak with you after. Thank you for your time, and let's get some lunch.